and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Daryl Grove, and I'm joined by a man who has studied for the test.
Oh boy.
All the MLS rules and regs. His name is Taylor Rockwell. Hello.
Hello, and let's not say all. Let's say some. I'm confident in some.
I'm going to say most. All right, so today is our Major League Soccer 101 show. The season starts this weekend. And we thought it was a good time to sort of take a step back, and we invited people to send us any terms that you hear in Major League Soccer, GAM, TAM, Designate Player, all that you want explained, as well as anything else in MLS that sort of seems complicated.
Yes.
And here's the secret to MLS. If it seems complicated, it's because it is.
Okay. I was going to say something similar. I was going to say MLS is simultaneously not that complicated and incredibly complicated.
It depends how deep you want to go, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you're just like, oh, okay, that's what that is, then you're fine. But if you're like, but why is it that way? Or how does this impact that? Then suddenly you're in a lot of trouble.
So everything has an easy answer that is like more or less easy to understand.
Yeah.
But if you're one of those kids that always ask your parents, but why? But why? But why? Which I was definitely that kid. If you can do that with the MLS
Not
rules.
surprising, by the way.
And then, yeah, I know. Why is it not surprising?
I think you know.
That was a joke. Next time you ask, there's another layer of stuff, and then in there you'll find another but why, and you can go really deep and get really complicated. We're going to go somewhere in the middle today, right? We're going to try and make this informative, but also entertaining. Maybe we'll throw in some of these sort of classic Total Soccer Show hit and miss metaphors, analogies, and
I think those are going to be out aplenty. I think you're also going to be able to hear my headache at some points because, it can be a little bit confusing.
Thumping into the microphone.
Yeah, and you're probably going to hear me explain something, and then there'll be a 2 Mississippi silence, and then Daryl say, I think that's not what it is, but we'll see. We'll see. My goal is for that not to happen.
And I'm also aware we will have some listeners who sort of know all of this inside out. They're like experts on the MLS rules and regulations. If you're that sort of person, then I'll say hello.
Then your name is Matt Doyle.
I was going to say hello, Paul Tenorio.
Oh, you got me.
I didn't know you listened.
I stomped on your joke. I'm sorry. But yeah, hey, Paul.
I don't think he listens, but he really is the guy when it comes to knowing the ins and outs of Major League Soccer.
We shall soon find out, I would say.
So, are you ready to get to it?
As ready as I'll ever be.
That's how I feel as well. So let's do this.
Okay.
All right. MLS 101 begins. First request we had was from Cole Robinson. It's the big question and the foundational thing of Major League Soccer. Single entity. What is single entity? What does that mean when people say MLS is single entity? How does it affect the league? How did that happen? What does it mean? There's so much here. I feel like everything else we're about to talk about rests on a foundation of single entity.
Yeah, and I think also
metaphors
and rests on a foundation of why. This is one of those questions that on the surface very simple.
Yeah, let's answer it.
Other American leagues, it's an association of independently owned teams. They're their own thing. They have a loose governance. With Major League Soccer, each team is owned by the league's investors. So basically, investor operators control the individual teams, but they are a part of one single entity.
There you go. I think, is that enough detail to explain it? I mean, my notes I had sort of a comparison to the Premier League, where every team is just an individual organisation. Like Manchester United is owned by the Glazer family. The players are employed by Manchester United. Their paycheck says Manchester United PLC, I think, on it when they get their check. And Man United just happen to play in the Premier League, right?
Yes.
Whereas Major League Soccer, the teams are actually part of the league. That's what it means, right? You're almost a department. Each team is a department or a franchise of Major League Soccer. And if you're a player, your check comes from Major League Soccer. Yeah. You're employed by Major League Soccer.
And this is why Major League Soccer, I think, is like a lawyer's paradise because everything is sort of similar, but the terminology is slightly different. Because essentially, like the owner of Atlanta United controls Atlanta United, but he's not actually the owner. He's the investor operator. Yeah. So it's like it's the same thing, but it's different, and that difference is key. And so what I meant then is like this is where you have that idea of so it's a very straightforward explanation as to what single entity means, but the question is why is Major League Soccer single entity?
So not what is single entity, but why is single entity?
Yeah, I think so.
Here's my very quick answer. It's that that was the quickest and safest way to stand up a professional soccer league in the United States of America in the mid-90s and to prevent teams going out of business by having everybody's risk pooled together in many, many ways, right? And so you didn't have different people going in different directions. You could sort of centralize it and like the league can decide what works and how this business is going to run, and you make sure it stays in business. And hopefully it grows faster than it would have otherwise. And
I know that we're having this conversation in a very different soccer political climate with everything that's happened with the U.S. soccer election. But again, it's worth remembering 1996, other leagues had failed several times over, and you do run that risk if you don't have that centralized authority of one team being like, no, we're doing our own thing, you can't tell us what to do, and you kind of completely remove that threat by making it single entity. And at a time when you're not sure if the league is going to exist or continue to exist, that makes sense as a way to ensure that everybody's doing the same thing, everybody's on the same page, no one's overspending, no one's going to necessarily risk going out of business. That's it. That said, 2 teams did. But whatever.
That's why. Well, no, 2 departments of the Major League Soccer organization were folded, right?
Yeah.
That's really what it counts as, right?
But I would almost say,
I think of each team as a department within a giant office building. You just, like, players get sent to different departments when you come through the Major League Soccer door.
Yeah, and I would say that,
you're going to the mail room.
Is that what Tampa was? I was wondering which one you were going to put there. But I would say even that, like, maybe this is seen through the lens of history. I probably didn't feel this way in the moment, and I was kind of concerned when this happened, even though I was young. Maybe that's a good example of, even with all these protocols in place, 2 teams still went out of business. And I do think that shows the vulnerability and fluctuation in the soccer market, in the soccer landscape, especially at that time.
So, but you can almost take that as proof that it was needed at the time, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Going. So this is why I know we get some pro-rel type people listening to our show. That's why I think our position on promotion relegation is very complicated, right? I don't want to lay it all out, right? Because that could be a whole podcast in and of itself. Yeah. But essentially, my feeling is MLS was needed with the single entity structure to stand the league up to begin with. And then the ideal scenario would be for the league to evolve to a point where you can then introduce promotion relegation and move away from single entity. But it's really like the more successful you are with single entity, the more you think that single entity is the reason you're successful. Yeah. So the less likely you are to let go of it. And that's why we're in this sort of bind right now when we have a somewhat successful professional soccer league, but also it's not what everybody wants it to be.
And also have one that has like literally gone out of business this week. Like that is also a big part of it. Or has ceased operations.
No, ceased operations for 2018.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, terminology is terminology.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah, and we were not in on the Rocco Camiso teleconference, telecall.
No, I saw highlights via Twitter.
Interesting. We're going to have to look into that in more depth.
Yeah, we'll do more on that next week, maybe.
But in the meantime, we've got more questions. Yes. Up next, David Guarnero wants to know about the salary cap, Daryl Grove.
Interesting. Okay,
so interesting because you're going to take issue with the terminology itself.
I am. So Matt Doyle at MLSsoccer.com convinced me in an article he wrote last year that you really shouldn't call it a salary cap because it is not as simple as
it's not.
You get to spend $3 million and that's it. There are so many loopholes and things built into it that it is more accurate to call it a salary budget. Correct?
Yes, and that is, I think this has been the part that I have genuinely enjoyed the most about researching all of these terms is that in the beginning, I found myself being like, this is so stupid to just raise the salary cap. Like, why do we have to have this and this and this? But when you remove some of those constructs and recognize, like, oh, I'm saying it's a cap, they're not necessarily saying it's a cap. They're using all these other terms. And when you sort of embrace it on that level, it starts to make a little more sense of like, oh, well, there's this and there's that, and this would fluctuate with that.
We'll get into
so
the
then
this
that
and
doesn't
that.
make sense.
The this and that is GAM, TAM, Designated Players, all that. We will explain all those terms later in today's show. We've kind of organized these questions in a way that build on each other. This is one you can't listen to halfway through.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Can we take a step back before we talk about salary budget?
Sure.
Just to maybe explain how that works, which is that because you are an owner investor in the league, you don't have to like find the money each year to pay your players, right? Essentially, the paychecks come from Major League Soccer head office for your basic roster, right? They say it's this year it is $4.035 million for the first 20 spots on your roster comes from the league. They will just get that covered. You don't have to look behind the couch to pay it. That's part of the point of it. Fair?
It is. But if you are completely new to this, if you have no idea, if you've never looked at American sports, basically what that means, the salary cap, not saying that's what we're doing, but for general purposes, it's basically the maximum amount you're allowed to spend to fill out your roster.
There you go. Did you look into the various parts of the roster? I wasn't as familiar with this until I did the research today. A Major League Soccer roster has 30 spots on it. 20 senior spots, and that's what the salary budget goes to. When you hear the $4 million number, that's what that goes to. And then there are 10 more, right? There's 5 supplemental roster spots and 5 reserve roster spots, which really, for the most part, just means those are the sort of low-earning players, right? They earn the league minimum of like 60-something and then 50-something for the reserve roster spots. And then you also throw in your homegrown players and your Generation Adidas players into those weird 10 spots on the end of the roster.
And if your head is already spinning, buckle up.
We're just getting started.
Yeah.
Maybe drink a glass of water.
Yeah, that's it. Or something stronger.
So do you think we've got salary cap down?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Given that we're, like, some of the things that you just mentioned we're going to get to later on.
Okay,
yes.
So the major exception to the salary budget, if you want to go over that when you want to sign a really famous player who you think could like take the league to the next level, let's say, just to choose a random example, let's say like David Beckham, for example. Oh. If you wanted to sign
what a
David
weird
Beckham,
one to land upon.
But he earns far too much to fit within the MLS salary budget, they invented a thing called the designated player.
Yep.
And the designated player is essentially you can pay that player basically whatever you want with league approval. I believe the league still has to approve it because that's like if one of your departments said, hey, we're going to get a new stapler and it costs $10 million. The head office might be like, no, that's not a good idea.
No.
Your department's going to go down if you do it. So, yeah, you can pay David Beckham or, more recent examples are Bastian Schweinsteiger or Giovinco or Josie Altidore.
There have been 114 since David Beckham. So there have been many recent examples.
So I won't list them, but Beckham was the first. You can pay them way above the salary budget and just the first chunk of that player's salary counts toward the salary budget, right?
Yes.
The current number is what, like 480,000 or so?
480,625, I believe.
Oh, on the nose, on the nose. So that first.
I like
chunk,
that I said I believe as though I didn't have it written in front of me. Yeah.
That first amount counts towards your salary budget. The rest just comes out of the team, like the team franchise's pocket, and not from the league's pocket.
Yes.
That's how that is set up.
See, this is what I mean with the lawyers thing. We're going to be dancing around the terms that we're most comfortable using because you can't technically use them.
All right.
Can't call them clubs.
Let's make this a pop quiz then. Now we've got the basics of designated player down. How many designated players can each team have?
2 or 3?
2 or 3.
Yeah.
So you get 2 for free.
Yep.
And then you can get a third one. You pay what is essentially a luxury tax,
150,000.
Right? You just have to pay 150,000 to the league. They then
just 150.
They distribute that to the rest of the teams as allocation money.
I think they call them the cheapskates. I think that's technically what they're called.
So, okay, designated player, is that done? Can we check that off the list?
No.
No? What else?
Because there are 3 categories of designated player. That's the
really?
issue, yes. And we did have that question from Daniel Baez about what is a young designated player.
Okay.
So you have basically a player who's over 23 years of age as of 2017. I don't know if these numbers have been adjusted for 2018. That was basically they hit for that 480,000 number. But then you have ones for 21 to 23, and then you have 20 years and under, and those are different ranges, basically.
I feel like you've made that sound more complicated than it is. If you're 24 or older,
Yeah.
you're a designated player, just a regular old designated player.
There we go.
If you're 23 or under, you're a young designated player, in which case all the rules are the same, but the first 200,000 only counts against the salary budget. And if you're 20 and younger, then only the first 150,000 counts against the salary budget.
That was probably the simpler way to put that.
The very basic thing with a young designated player is, 1, they're younger, which is the obvious part, and 2, less of their salary, approximately less than half of their salary, almost a third, is all that counts against your salary budget, which gives you more room to spend on other players. That rule I assume is in place to encourage teams to sign younger designated players. It's sort of the anti-retirement league rule. Is that fair?
Yep, it is. But
and
then
you don't pay luxury tax on it.
Yep, and then but you've got rules surrounding that though to I think to try to close loopholes that probably were created by creating the young DP laws. So for example, that 200,000 for a player who's 21 to 23, you can't pay that down with GAM or TAM.
Yes.
That is just what it is. You can't make them not a DP by paying them down a little
Fair
bit
enough.
because that would be a loophole to get around having to pay them that larger amount.
Can we step back and go big picture and just think about all these young Argentinians that are being signed by the league? It seems to me that is a direct result of the young DP rule.
I would say so.
Right? You can easily sign a young DP and not have them count too much on your salary budget. You don't even have to pay them all that much, right? You beat their Argentina salary and you have a really talented number 10 come into the league.
Or you pay them a lot more.
Or you pay them a lot more.
Yeah.
Well, it depends who they are, right? It depends who they are. I don't know how much Houston are playing Thomas Martinez, for example, but he's 22. I assume he's a young DP.
I would assume Ezequiel Barco is doing just fine.
Yes.
That's what I would say.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, he's a classic young DP.
I think he might just be a straight-up DP. I could be wrong.
No, he's a DP.
Oh, because it's an age thing.
That's the point, right? It's not about
right.
how much money. It's just about what counts against your salary budget. He's definitely a young DP.
And speaking of that, one quick clarification that maybe just makes it more convoluted for people who maybe were just randomly curious. Age is determined by birth year, not like date, not whenever you were. It's basically if you are going to be 8, or if you're going to be 21 in this year, then that's what you're going to be. They don't worry about like in relation to when you were signed or anything like that.
Your age of this
Yes.
year. I feel like we're getting too deep in the weeds here, and we might lose some people.
Hey, you never know, man. Maybe somebody was really concerned about age ranges. And now they know.
Well, let's get out of the weeds.
Sure.
Let's get out of the DP weeds and very cautiously wander towards the GAM weeds.
Yeah.
General allocation money. You'll see it listed as GAM, all caps, and you'll hear it a lot, and I think a lot of people will be confused by it. What is general allocation money, Taylor? You're on the clock.
It is. Oh boy! It's essentially each team is given, I believe, around $150,000 each year.
It's $200,000 now.
It is $200,000 now. It's been bumped. See, this is the confusing thing. Again, is that there's a lot of stuff that like was provided for in the 2017 regulations for 2018, but they don't have the 2018 like policy necessarily in place or well publicized. So it's a lot of like, I think that's what it is.
But before we talk amounts, let's back up and say, what is general allocation money? What is it? What does it even do?
Well, basically, it's money that you're given to essentially strengthen your roster in a variety of different ways. So that means that you can pay down a non-DP player, you can pay down a DP player, you can use it to strengthen
I'm going to ask you what
salaries.
pay down is in a minute.
Sure. But, I mean, you can basically use it in a wider variety of ways, hence why it's general.
And it's basically in addition to your salary budget, right? So you've got your salary budget, then this just comes on top to try and strengthen it in various ways, as you said.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe we'll talk about different ways you can spend it.
Sure.
Okay, let's start with that pay down, because I know a lot of people were curious about what does pay down even mean.
So if you, I don't know this for sure. You can feel free to correct me or feel free to say you're getting too much in the weeds. But I think a big part of it is that as the designated player threshold has increased, it's made it easier to pay people down, so they're suddenly no longer designated players. Because it used to be when it was, say, for example, 200,000, just as throwing out that number, if you were paying somebody 500,000, that was a big gulf. Now it's 480 if you're paying them 500,000.
Yeah.
That's not that big of a
So
difference.
that's the thing, yeah. Say someone's salary is 500,000 and your DP threshold beyond 480,000 and 625, they're a designated player. All you've got to do is take some general allocation money, pay it down, pay them that little bit, and you get them under the DP threshold. Then you get yourself a new DP slot.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
There you go. So it's a way to sort of pay that down.
Yes.
But it also works with non-DP players, right? You could have sort of just a guy on your roster who is making 100, or you add into your roster, but he's making 120,000, but you only have 80,000 space on your roster. When you sign that player, instead of being like, oh, we don't have the budget, you can use allocation money to just knock the 40,000 off the edge and get under the limit.
Right.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
Cool. Okay, where does it come from? Where does general allocation money come from? We said that the league gives you, say, 200,000. There are other mechanisms by which you sort of earn allocation money.
I mean, do you mean aside from trading it? Because you can trade it.
You can trade it.
That's one big part. I mean, and that is kind of the thing with Major League Soccer, is that it seems like everything is tradable unless they've told you specifically it's not tradable.
Do you think that's the rule?
Yes.
Unless
DP slots can no longer be traded, or maybe never could.
Unless we specifically say no trading, you can trade it.
So that's one way. What's another way, Daryl?
Finishing not so well. If you don't make the playoffs, you get extra
Finishing
allocation.
Not so well is the official term.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if you sort of don't make the playoffs one year, you get extra. I can't remember the amount, but you 200,000 again. You get 200,000 the next season. Basically saying, you guys look like you need some help. Here's a little extra cash. Get yourself back up on your feet.
Yep.
Right? That's one use of allocation money.
Yeah.
Making the CONCACAF Champions League, you get extra allocation money, basically because you're going to have more games in your season. Yeah. Unless you're the Colorado Rapids, you just say, it's preseason. Yeah. They should take that. They should take the Champions League money back, the allocation money back from the Colorado Rapids if Anthony Hudson says it's preseason.
Did they do both? They did both. So they made the CONCACAF Champions League, but then also didn't make the playoffs.
Yeah.
so they got more GAM. That's outstanding. I was about to joke that somebody should do that. And I was like, wait, they did do that.
They hit the GAM pot.
Yeah. It's good stuff by them.
Also, if you sell a player, you get expansion money. And if you are an expansion team, you get extra allocation money as well. But yeah, it has turned into a weird. There's so much of it floating around now that it's turned into trading money, right?
Yes.
It's like a cryptocurrency that exists only within Major League Soccer.
And I can't remember who. I think
it
DC
predates Bitcoin.
DC was one. I can't remember who the other club was this season. Who there was a trade that was one team traded GAM for TAM, which is fascinating. It was the most MLS thing ever.
Well, that's a good segue.
Maybe it was Toronto,
because that's the thing that so many people asked. Right? Okay, GAM is a thing.
Yep.
TAM is a thing. How are they different? So GAM is general allocation money. TAM is targeted allocation money. I think that's a good way to think of it, the word targeted. Why is it targeted, Taylor
So
Rockwell?
they're different in the sense that general is a different word than targeted.
Yeah.
So they're not the same.
Do you have more detail on that?
Did I do it?
You did not.
I mean, I'm assuming there are more differences than this. The fundamental difference that I can understand, and grain of salt here, this is the thing that I always kind of have to ask you, wait, is that GAM or TAM? From what I understood, TAM, you can use it specifically to pay down a DP spot, but if you do that, you have to be replacing that designated player immediately. So essentially, if Daryl's a designated player, but I'm going to pay his salary down with TAM, I have to then immediately be signing another designated player. You can't just use it because then you're using it as general instead of targeted.
I don't know if that's true or not, but I feel like we should establish more of the basics before we get to that. So the reason for targeted allocation money is that they always talk about it as being targeted at the sort of middle class of your roster, right?
Okay.
So you can spend it on players who aren't quite DP players but are sort of just beneath, and it was to increase the quality of Major League Soccer, right? So it's players who are making more than the 480,000 that crosses the DC threshold up to $1 million. You can take some TAM and sort of.
Do you mean DP threshold?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Did I say DP
You said
threshold?
DC, I think, and I was like, wait, what?
I meant DP.
Okay.
So anything above the DP threshold and up to $1 million, you can pay that down using targeted allocation money. Here's the thing. You get $1.2 million in targeted allocation money every season. So you can really go to town with the TAM for trading it and for spending it on the middle of your roster. It's been a big influx.
So 1.2 million, yeah. Did you see another thing about getting another additional 2.8 million per year?
Okay, so here's the difference. The 1.2 million is league money, right? The league gives a team that and basically says, here's your target allocation money, here's what you're allowed to do with it, go do it, go make Major League Soccer better, go sell the product for us, right? They also say then, you can spend 2.8 million per season in discretionary TAM.
Okay.
Discretionary TAM means
At your discretion?
out of your pocket.
Yeah.
It means you can spend that and you can add that to your budget, but we're not giving you that money. You have to find that money. You're probably a billionaire. You can manage it.
Exactly. Which, again, is the strange aspect of Major League Soccer where it's essentially you're the owner of Atlanta. You can afford to spend that. You go spend that. But you're not the owner. You're the investor-operator.
Yeah.
So it's still a strange thing where it's like, you know what we mean, but we're not going to use that.
Yeah, so designated players
Yeah.
and targeted allocation money, those are two examples where you have a single entity structure and the costs are controlled, but then you're also encouraged as the investor/operator of a franchise to take money out of your own pocket and spend it on your own department of Major League Soccer.
And I'm saying this only
It's a weird
because,
hybrid type thing.
Yeah, I do think, I don't believe this, but this is the type of thing that makes people get frustrated with Major League Soccer to the level of accusing it of being kind of a scam, because there are these moments of like, but you should do this. We're not saying you have to. We're not mandating it. We're not giving you the money to do it, but you should want to do this. Just like there are those moments of like, why is that a thing that should be happening outside of you should just want the league to be better? And I do think that does frustrate some people, but I also think GAM and TAM have been used so successfully to strengthen the league in a way that you now have so much more depth than you used to, that I think it's been a successful thing, albeit confusing.
And I kind of like TAM and designated player stuff because it is just slightly loosening the reins of the Major League Soccer single entity, like everyone has the same amount of money situation. It's not as good as each club being an actual soccer club with their own individual finances, but it's at least a tiny step towards it, right?
Yeah.
And the more steps we can take towards it, I think the sooner we'll actually get there. So I'm never going to complain about teams being given more freedom, such as in the form of the 2.8 million in discretionary TAM. My question would be, why not just say you can spend as much TAM as you want?
What do you mean?
Like, just say to teams, you can spend as much targeted allocation money as you like.
Because then you're not setting limits on how much you can spend. It essentially negates the entire need for
because then
a salary
Arthur Blank
budget.
could bankrupt himself and no longer be able to invest in Atlanta United.
Well, no, or he could just spend $80 million on TAM.
Yeah.
And then.
But why not? Why would that be a bad thing?
Because if you're a league that's all about parity, you
yeah.
can't guarantee that to the other owners. It essentially is then being like, you don't own your club, and now you have to spend a whole bunch more to stay competitive.
Oh, because then you've got to match Arthur Blank.
Not saying I agree with that. I'm saying that is why they would say that.
No, but the other owners would not be into it, right?
No.
Because they'd be like, we can't keep up with Arthur's dollars.
Nope. That is exactly what would happen.
He keeps buying Barcelona's first team. We can't do that.
But there are the rules about how you can spend what you want on a designated player for the transfer fee, and that's exactly what he has done.
Okay. Oh, dear.
Yep.
Should we not go there?
We can do whatever we want.
Do you want to explain that?
I mean, we can. I mean, I don't know if it comes up later. But yeah, essentially that with a lot of players, if they're not going to be a designated player, if you're paying a transfer fee, that transfer fee is rolled into the salary budget for that year.
So it gets expensive.
So if I am the owner of DC United and I buy Daryl Grove from Wolverhampton for $100,000, his salary is going to be $100,000 that first year.
Bargain.
I definitely did. That first year, basically, those two combined $200,000 for Daryl against the cap.
So salary and transfer fee gets rolled into the salary budget, which I didn't know that until this morning.
Did
I think it's weird.
It is a little
I
weird.
don't understand why they want to do that.
It basically disincentivizes you to go out and sign players for $1 million or $2 million because that's going to cause you problems. We can get to other wrinkles with that one, but the key issue here is that if it's a designated player, then that doesn't factor into it
Right.
because only a certain amount is counting against the cap. So you can go out and spend tens of $millions on a player, and that's fine.
So yeah, Ezekiel Barker, what is it, $15 million? Imagine if that was rolled into the salary budget. That would be like the next.
There would be problems.
The next 3 or 4 years of Atlanta's salary budget would just be taken up with that.
Yes.
Okay, so before we answer, we get a little more specific even in the second half of the show. But first, today's show is sponsored by the fine people at Squarespace.
Yeah, it is.
It's complicated to build a Major League Soccer roster. We're not even halfway through how complicated it is. It is very simple to build a Squarespace website.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I think you could use that simplicity to make a complex thing more simple.
Okay.
Because I would love if there were a website that explained this stuff in understandable, digestible bits, but maybe connected it to the questions that you're then going to have. We've explained targeted allocation money, but what is allocation? Here's a link to explain that. Because I did find myself, I think we both did, ending up with roughly 6,000 tabs open on my Safari browser.
I was like George Qureshi for a minute there.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's a frightening territory to be in. Suddenly I wanted to walk my dogs all the time and run a successful magazine. It was different.
Eat giant cookies.
But fun. And eat giant cookies, of course, yes.
So you actually could do that, right? You could build a whole website that just explains every aspect of Major League Soccer. It would be simple to put together on Squarespace. You could spend the whole time marveling at how a complicated thing can be made so simple.
That would be nice, right? Because after you're dealing with, I think I've explained that. Oh, but I could very easily post that. That's nice. That makes it easier.
One, to go sort of off ad for a second, one complicated topic is just the same word used in different scenarios, right? So we're going to talk about the allocation list and the allocation order later, but there's also general allocation money. Those two things, allocation money and allocation list and order, are not even linked, but you use that same very specific word, and I think it adds an extra layer of complication to Major League Soccer.
Again, Lawyers League, man. Lawyers League.
MLSEs. It's written in MLSEs.
Should we mention, while we're off topic for a second, should we mention Alexander Abnos here, or should we do that later on?
I mean, you've done it now, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so you made a great flowchart for Sports Illustrated, which explains how to sign a player to Major League Soccer and the complicated flowchart you have to go through. The thing is gigantic.
And genuinely helpful, though.
Yes.
That's the thing.
It is.
Yes.
But it only explains the sort of signing a player process, right? There's loads of other Major League Soccer stuff that you would need the whole website for.
And that's that would be a good combination, because then, we did this with Jeff Cameron. We were trying to figure out how he's here but could be there and why this is the case.
We're trying to figure out.
Vague.
Okay, yeah.
But I was just going to keep it vague. But basically then you could look at that, follow the flowchart and be like, wait, I don't know what that means. And then you could go to that separate page where it explains that, and it's all in one location.
So you're essentially asking someone to please build this website.
Kind of.
And when you do,
you
can get, at least the best we could do for you is to get you 10% off the launch price.
You're welcome.
So you go to squarespace.com, you get a free trial where you can set up the beginnings of the website. And then when you've got it fully finished, about 100 years from now, and you're ready to launch, you can use the discount code TSS, that's TSS, and you'll get 10% off the purchase price of your website.
There we are. So thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's program.
And thank you to whoever is out there who manages to put this website together, explaining all the rules and regs for MLS and updates it at the start of every season.
I hope you've gone outside in the last 2 months. All right, so should we get back to some terminology?
Where are we? We are with Shane Carlson's question. Who counts as a homegrown player?
All right.
Homegrown players, they're hot right now.
So it's basically young players coming from the team's academy or their specific discovery area, which allows you to get around allocation and discovery rules.
Yes, you don't they don't have to be drafted or anything like that. If you have a player in your academy for a year or more, or if they're in your catchment area, right, you can sign them to a homegrown player contract. And then you can basically put them on the, I can't remember if it's a supplemental or reserve, but it's the sort of the final 10 players of your salary budget, right? They don't count against the first 20 of your salary budget. So essentially, homegrown players are cheap.
They are. Here is, though, where, do you have anything else to say about that?
I mean, I've got lots more to say, but I'm not going to interrupt you.
Well, my question, though, is you said either play in your academy or live in that area for a year. I'm not sure that's an or. When I read the rules, it was an and.
Okay.
But I'm wondering if that's if that's an MLS thing, because it does also end with or other unspecified league requirements. And I'm sure and I say this only because...
What, the MLS guide says or other unspecified league requirements?
It sure does. And this is what confuses me
They're
because...
the league, they can specify.
They can, but I think they choose not to because I think there are cases that they like to keep vague. Specifically, I'm talking about Josh Sargent.
Yes.
Because he was not playing for Sporting KC's academy, as far as I understand.
He was at St. Louis.
Scott Gallagher.
Yeah.
So then I don't understand how he would qualify other than being in that Sporting KC catchment area because he wasn't with the club. So there's weird wrinkles in there that are still sort of uncertain in my mind, unless it is an or and they accidentally wrote and.
One way to think of all the MLS rules is how can we get the player in the league?
Yep.
Right? That's part of like the reason the David Beckham designated player rule came about is because LA Galaxy were aware that David Beckham possibly wanted to come.
Yeah.
So we put a rule together to make sure David Beckham can somehow fit into the confines of this, right?
Clinton Dempsey wants to come back to Major League Soccer.
Yeah.
Seattle wants him back. They're willing to pay. Let's find a way to make that happen.
They're not top of the allocation order, but we'll do something.
We'll do something.
And the same with homegrown players, right? You make sure that you can try and get the player in the league somehow. Here's a great example. Jordan Morris.
Yep.
Jordan Morris was getting offers from Werder Bremen. He'd already been either played for or had been around the US men's national team. He was at Stanford, but it was a player that everybody wanted, including Major League Soccer wanted him. Right? They didn't want to sign him to a homegrown player contract where he's making like $50,000, $60,000 a year because Werder Bremen could top that without even they wouldn't even miss that money. Right? So they introduced what was it called, like a homegrown player, what's the word? It's almost like a stipend. Homegrown player like reimbursement, homegrown player bonus money, essentially. Okay. So you can take, I think, $125,000.
Now who's in the weeds is my
right.
is my response.
But essentially, you can I just can't remember the name of it. Yeah. But you can take $125,000 and just add it to the homegrown player salary.
Yep.
So that's why Jordan Morris' salary went from it would have been 50 something, and it's now 170 something in his first year because he got that homegrown extra money.
Whoever makes the Squarespace page, because I like that now we're just operating under the assumption that someone is definitely going to do that. I want everything to be explained with it being we call there was a period of time when, as you said, the designated player rule was the
David Beckham rule. Yeah,
it's faded a little bit since it's been more than 10 years. But I do like the idea of the Morris rule, the Dempsey rule.
Yes, that's essentially what these things are. Right? I found it's called the Homegrown Subsidy.
So
you get a subsidy of $125,000 that you can then give to basically a homegrown player that we otherwise wouldn't be able to attract to the league with that quite small salary, not in real people terms, but small salary
not in real people terms. Yeah.
In professional athlete terms. Fair?
Fair. Oh, MLS. All right, next question. Next terminology question,
So this is a confusing thing. There's homegrown players are always young players because eventually they move on from the homegrown player contract and get big contracts, right? The other young player contract is the Generation Adidas contract.
Wait, hold on. I want to clarify that because I didn't realize that was a thing. Because Bill Hamid, as of last season, was still qualifying as a homegrown player.
Well, he was listed as a homegrown player, but he wasn't on a homegrown player
contract. Okay, so there's two different
You move on
there.
At some point.
Cool.
Yes, you sort of graduate. Okay.
There we go.
So, but that was a good clarification.
Thank you.
You're nothing if not detailed. So, yes, homegrown players. The other type of young player contract is the Generation Adidas contract. Jack Niles asked, what's the Generation Adidas contract? What's that all about? I see you've raised a piece of paper, so I'm guessing you have some answers.
I've got what I think is the answer.
Yeah.
It's essentially a program originally with Nike, now with Adidas.
Project 40, right?
Yep. It's basically for professional-ready players in the U.S. development system who are not eligible for the MLS Super Draft, but they're, I guess, very young players that Major League Soccer, to what you were saying earlier, wants to get in the league, so they found a way to get them in the league.
Yep, all these rules. How can we get this player in this league? That's the question. And one of the answers is Generation Adidas.
Yes, and so it initially started as a way to get young, promising Americans involved in Major League Soccer as quickly as possible.
Just de facto it was.
Yeah, and I think when Travis and Clark and I had this conversation about it, and I was kind of frustrated because it was this idea of you're getting young Americans in there, that's really good. But I'm thinking that maybe it's because you have the homegrown player rules and you've got academies now that suddenly maybe that's why we're seeing that shift towards non-Americans.
Yep.
For example, this last class, 5 of the 6, I think, were not Americans.
I took a look at it because there's a Wikipedia page, right, where they list all the Generation Adidas players by year. I think a lot of Ghanaians, a couple of Germans. It was
John Matinho,
an English player and a Portuguese player. Yeah, so it was a very non-American Generation Adidas class.
Yes.
But previously it was heavily American and a little bit Canadian.
It sure was. And the incentive here is, and then the other thing would be that if you're a young college player who isn't from an academy, you basically can't declare for the Super Draft until you're done with your senior year.
Is that really true? I did not know that.
That's what our friend Travis says.
Okay. If he says, then it's true.
I'm assuming, unless I'm misquoting him, in which case, Travis, I apologize, but I don't really because I'm using you.
So this is a way to dodge doing all 4 years and get in the draft early.
Yes,
right?
I think so.
It should be called the college dropout contract.
Sure, that works. But the other key component here is Generation Adidas players do not count against the senior roster and usually earn a much higher salary than the league minimum.
So that's what Homegrown Player and Generation Adidas have in common in many ways, right? So then, you become a Generation Adidas player. You essentially sign with Major League Soccer, and then you go through the draft to see, again, which department you end up in at the Major League Soccer building.
Because, again, that gets around allocation order if you're bringing in this young Ghanaian who's very exciting, but there's no real way to say, like, okay, who wants him? Like, it's a way to do that in a more structured environment than just sort of throwing him to the allocation order and hoping something works.
A good example, because we've been given examples, right? So David Beckham is the Designate Player example. Jordan Morris was the Homegrown Player and the Homegrown Player Subsidy example. I'm going to say Jackson Ewell is the Generation Adidas example. Went and played in college for UCLA, he said, questioningly. I think he played for UCLA. Became a Generation Adidas player, then he went through the draft, and San Jose picked him up when he was only like 19 or 20, right? So he didn't complete all of college. I don't know how much he's earning, because I'm not sure the Generation Adidas salaries are as public as the others.
I think it's $65 million.
That seems fair.
I might have just made that up.
All right, Generation Adidas described?
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that leads us to Chris Barney asking about international roster spots, Daryl.
Ooh, okay. This is a good one. So essentially, an international roster spot is on the Major League Soccer roster. It's essentially assumed that it's for domestic players, right? But they have a limit of how many international players you can have. And it's a weird thing where...
Sort of, but yeah.
Yeah, it's basically 8 per team total international roster spots, right? So it's 184 international roster spots in Major League Soccer for 2018. But then you can trade them around, right?
Again, as long as it's not nailed down, you can trade it.
There are no limits on how many international spots you can trade around. I think there's an assumption that teams won't want to trade them all away. So it tends to be around 8, right? Like plus or minus 1 or 2. Well, the most I saw was 10.
Yes, and the least you saw was?
I don't know.
Can you guess which club it was or team it was? You can guess.
Can I?
Yeah.
New York Red Bulls?
No. The fewest? Come on. What team isn't going to want to spend money on international players?
Oh, because that's the point, right? You don't get like rubbish international players. It's someone you would have had to gone out and identify and buy. I don't want to say it.
It's DC United. Of course it is. They have 6. And NYCFC, as you said, has 10.
Okay.
One other like quick wrinkle here might send us down into the weeds, so I apologize, is just when it comes to Canadian teams, domestic players, like non-international players for Canadian teams, would be both Canadian and American players.
So they get the double.
But they have to have 3 Canadian players. Each Canadian team has to have 3 players on the roster. That is not the case for the United States teams.
Yes.
American teams, Canadians count as international spots.
So what I find interesting is 184 international roster spots. I did the calculation. There are 690 roster spots, 30 per team for 23 teams. That's actually quite a low ratio
it is.
Compared to, say, the Premier League, right? That's fewer international players than in other leagues that I can think of, at least at face value.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah?
My only hesitation there, and I genuinely do not know the answer to this, maybe you do, and if not, let's just pretend like I didn't ask it, is we said you have like the roster is 30, but 20 are the senior players. Could they be in those other 10 then, or would it have to be...
It's unlikely they would be, because they'd be coming here for a very small salary.
There we go.
Right? So, yeah, and that's the point, right, is even though... Because it does feel like there are a lot of non-American players in Major League Soccer, right? And I think one of the reasons is that most of the international roster spots go to players who are at least in your matchday squad, probably in your starting 11.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, why did you bother going to get them?
Yeah.
Right?
If you're looking at it on Soccer Way with the flags next to them, the bench probably has a lot of American flags.
Yes. But not all American, because it's not just American citizens who count as domestic players.
This is true.
Right? So we had a question from Antonio Yatt. Antonio Yatt asks, why do green cards make international players exempt from international slots?
So we've both done a little bit of research on this one.
Yes.
Do you want to start with the visa process or the specific visa?
Yeah, so I'll say this, right? So for an international roster spot, like we were just talking about, you would have to go through the USCIS and apply for a P1A visa, which is essentially a professional athlete visa.
That's it.
That's how you sort of, are able to come and play a sport in the United States, right? They last for 5 years. That's why most contracts are 5 years in Major League Soccer, as I understand it, right? But permanent resident is someone like me. I'm a permanent resident of the United States, not yet a citizen. But the reason I'm a permanent resident is because I didn't come over here for work, right? Taylor didn't phone me up in 2005 and say, hey, I've never met you, but you seem like you might be a good podcast partner. I've got a good idea. No, I met my wife and I moved to the United States because I love my wife, right?
Also, what's a podcast in 2005?
Yeah, right. They were just getting started, right? So usually when you have a permanent resident card, a green card is the slang for it, basically. You're here for other reasons. You have non-professional reasons to be in the United States. That's why you don't count as an international roster spot, right? Because you're a US resident.
This is true.
Yeah.
And with that, it's worth noting, I think at least, that doesn't just happen. That you can't, like, at the end of that P1A visa, after 5 years, you're not just, like, then a permanent resident because you've been here for a certain amount of time.
You can't just be like, oh, I've picked up a bit of an accent.
Yeah, exactly. Or I've lost my accent.
Give me my green card.
So you have to apply for an adjustment in status. And essentially, if you just say, like, I've been here and I like it, you're getting rejected immediately. Because U.S. immigration and customs law is very, very specific and very, very finicky. In this case, the three things that you basically can use to justify applying for a change in status would be if you are investing in an American company or significantly investing, if you are being sponsored by your employing company to, like, stay here for long term. Major League Soccer wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, Major League Soccer would not do, because it's not like when you go to work for, say you work for an entertainment company and I'm guessing, like, John Oliver's a bad example because he married an American citizen, right? But say a company wants
Which is the third thing.
A company wants to hire you for like 20 years.
Yeah.
They would sponsor you maybe for a permanent resident card. You're not going to play for a Major League Soccer team for 20 years.
You're not.
That'd be like Ryan Giggs, and you'd have to get here when you were 16.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So really, for a lot of Major League Soccer players, when they are a permanent resident, I'm saying this from, like, my understanding, it means that they have had a change in life, usually meaning that they have gotten married to an American citizen.
Yes, there you go.
So that means essentially they're setting down roots, putting down roots.
Yeah, exactly. The same reason that I'm here, right?
Yeah.
I put down roots. Like, if a Major League Soccer team wanted to sign me, I would count as a domestic player because I've got roots in the United States that are not just related to that. I think the other wrinkle here is Antonio didn't ask about this, but if you get refugee or asylum status, you are also a domestic player because you have a non-soccer domestic reason to be here.
Yeah,
there you go.
Darlington Nagbe, for example.
I think,
yeah, and I would say like it's not the same, but it's similar that you do have that in Europe where South American players can get Spanish citizenship and then they don't count against the international roster spots of their Spanish clubs. So it's a little different because they've gotten citizenship, but it is still the same basic idea.
Shall we move on?
Sure.
Matt Schlemmer wants to know, what is a special discovery player and how does that work? This might be the most confusing thing in all the Major League Soccer rules and regs to me because I sort of don't understand why it needs to exist.
We can basically only find one example of it, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, there have been many examples, but only one that we could find evidence.
Have there been, though? That's what I'm saying. Is I'm not sure there have been.
Oh, okay.
Like, I mean, maybe there are, because a lot of people seem to know what this was.
Yep.
But I still can't find lots and lots of examples.
So what is it, Tyler? What is a special discovery player?
Okay, it's a player whose acquisition cost, which I'm assuming means transfer fee, up to $500,000, you can amortize over the term of that player's contract. So, in simple language.
So the example Taylor gave earlier was if I played for Wolves and a team signed me for $100,000 and paid me $100,000 in salary. First of all, I'm doing better than I expected soccer-wise in that situation. Against their salary budget would count my $100,000 salary, but also my $100,000 transfer fee would all go into that year's salary budget.
Yes.
And the word amortize basically means spread out.
Yeah, because the issue would be that if, to extend it further, say Daryl Grove wanted $200,000 in a salary. That's okay, we can do that. But Wolverhampton, going back to them, wanted $300,000 in a transfer fee. If I put that together and bundle it, that means you're a designated player now.
Yeah.
So I think it's basically a way so you don't have that all hit up front. Now you can spread that out over 5 years. You're no longer a DP.
So I could be just like $80,000 or $100,000 a year of my transfer fee could be on the salary budget. You amortize it out.
You sure do.
Yeah.
Can I? Do you have anything else to say about this one? Because I want to make it MLS.
Just think it's weird. I just don't get why it needed to exist.
Okay. I'm not sure either, other than there was the one Armenian player.
If it was going to exist, why not make it way more than 500,000?
That would also make sense. I think maybe because then you're kind of getting around DP rules. Maybe that's, I don't know. But here is where I can make it incredibly MLS-y for you, is the rule I have is that they must be 27 years old or younger during the league year in consideration, and you can't have, there can be no more than one special discovery player per club.
Yeah.
Except there can be, because you, Daryl Grove, I think you can either sell me your player or you can sell me that right, but then you no longer have it. And until that player leaves the league, you don't have a special discovery player again. It's a very weird Major League Soccer thing of like, okay, well then there's a finite number, and those can be moved around, but they can't really be moved around.
Oh, dear.
Welcome to MLS.
Speaking of moving players around, Placido wants to know, what is the re-entry draft?
Sure.
So obviously the super draft is players coming through college, get drafted into the league. Everybody, that makes sense. What is the re-entry draft?
Sure. It's basically a move towards free agency without actually allowing for free agency. But it means that players who are out of contract but don't necessarily qualify to be free agents or who have had their options declined
by their teams.
Yeah, it basically means they're put into a re-entry draft where clubs who are trying to get players who basically maybe don't want to go out and sign an international right back can say, oh, Tyrone Mears is available, I will take him. And that's what some teams did, or one team specifically.
It's somewhat similar to the waiver draft, right? There's a waiver draft as well, which is a separate thing, but the re-entry draft is similar to that.
Yep.
Is that fair?
And then if a player isn't selected in either one of those, they become a free agent.
Is that right? Do you have to go through that before you become a free agent?
Unless you've met those league rules.
I don't think you can become a free agent unless you meet the league rules at all. I think that's
I think because after that, otherwise you're just sitting there waiting for your club to do something. Yeah, because they've got your rights anymore. So I think once no one has selected you, I think your rights are given up by whomever was your previous employer if you don't get selected in either of the re-entry drafts or either one of the drafts.
How sure of that are you?
100%.
100%, okay.
Yes.
Can we talk a little free agency as well?
You're available on a first-come, first-served basis to all clubs.
So that's just basically free agency.
Yes.
But then are you only available at your old contract level?
That I don't know.
So to me, the point of free agency...
Oh, is you can renegotiate your contract.
You can renegotiate your contract.
That's a good point.
And that's a thing that the Major League Soccer Players Union fought for about 4 or 5 years ago now. So there is... No one asked about this, but I think it's important. Yeah. There is free agency where you can let your contract expire and then you renegotiate it with any other club you want. But there are rules, right?
Yep.
You have to be 28 years old or over, and you have to have played in the league for 8 years or more.
Yes, and we thought that was consecutively, but it seems like maybe that is not the case, or never was the case.
It seems like Ricardo Clark was able to do it, and he hasn't been in the league 8 years consecutively because he went to Germany for a bit, but he has been in the league 8 years total.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right, so I think we got that covered. All right. Let's move on to a thing that gets very confusing for very many people.
And I'll let you take it then, Daryl Grove.
Okay.
I jumped in. What is the allocation ranking list, and how does the allocation ranking order work?
So let's take these two things separately. Sure. Okay, the allocation ranking list is a list of players that are sort of players that you should want in the league, right? Yep. Players that Major League Soccer wants in the league, essentially. Again, how can we get the players we want into Major League Soccer? That's the question. The allocation list is select US men's national team players. An example, Alejandro Bedoya was on the allocation list when he was coming back.
Fabian Johnson is there right now.
Is he really? Select elite US youth national team players and players transferred outside of Major League Soccer who went for a transfer fee of less than $500,000. Right. So if you leave the league but not for big money, you can come back in on the allocation list. So the players on the list are determined by Major League Soccer. So it's essentially like, here's a bunch of players we want in the league, right?
Yeah.
That's how it works. It's selected by a department, like a technical department.
I love all the big breaths in between.
I know. I keep waiting for the bad part. It's not so bad, right? It's all okay. Okay, so some of the players on the list right now. You mentioned, who did you mention? Fabian Johnson. DeAndre Yedlin is on there. Jeff Cameron is on there. So quite a few players on the allocation list. Then the question is, if a player who's on the allocation list becomes available, which team gets him? And that's where we have the allocation order. So the allocation order is literally a ranking of teams from number 1 down to number 23. And it's the rough thing is that it's from the previous season, the worst team in the league goes to the top of the allocation order. But then you can trade for places in the allocation order.
You sure can.
So when one of these players, if say Fabian Johnson wants to come to the league, he would right now go to whomever is top of the allocation order. I didn't check before we recorded. I don't know.
LA Galaxy.
The LA Galaxy are top of the allocation order right now. So right now it would be that whatever Fabian Johnson wanted to do, he would be bound for The LA Galaxy.
Yes.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but as you said, these are tradable. So I think it was when Russell was coming back in, FC Dallas were top of the allocation order. Orlando sent them $400,000 or $500,000 in, I'm assuming, GAM. They then...
Probably a combination of GAM and TAM if recent trades or anything
yes.
to go by.
And then they were able to take him with that first allegation spot.
There you go.
And once you've used it, you drop to the bottom of the order. So Orlando are now at the bottom, and then FC Dallas took Orlando's old spot.
So here's the question people will be asking. What happened with, say, Clint Dempsey? Why did was he able to just come in and go straight to Seattle Sounders?
Well, person building that Squarespace website, this would be where you get the Dempsey rule.
That's basically what it should be called, right? Because I think it did sort of exist somewhere, but had just never been used before, which is one of the flaws of Major League Soccer rules and regs is they're not very... The next level detail is not necessarily public, right? Just the basic stuff is public. But essentially there's a rule that designated players of special quality as designated by the league are exempt from the allocation order, right?
Yeah, and I'll say...
basically they can play for Seattle if we want them to.
And I'll say this, because this is another thing that makes it kind of confusing, is with what we've just explained and with the flowchart we've talked about, you would be like, oh yeah, that makes sense because he was initially sold from an MLS club for more than $500,000. He's coming back into the league, so he goes into the allocation. Like all of this would make sense, but then once you change the rules, it then makes it make more sense. Like, oh yeah, that at the time it was really weird that suddenly Seattle were able to get Clint Dempsey out of nowhere.
Yep.
But now because they've made these adjustments, it's like, oh yeah, okay, that's totally understandable.
So a good example of a player that did come normally through the process is the aforementioned Alejandro Bedoya. So Chicago Fire were top of the allocation order. Philadelphia Union, I don't know what they traded, but they traded with Chicago Fire to go to the top. They got Alejandro Bedoya, in he goes. He enters Major League Soccer, he goes to Philadelphia Union. That's how the allocation order is supposed to work.
But then, so why was Clint Dempsey able to go to Seattle?
I think because he's just of such a high profile and special quality.
It's like special quality, a U.S. national team player.
As decided by the league, essentially, right? Yeah. So it's not very concrete, but it's sort of an out. It's a loophole that the league created for themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Yeah. I think that's the best way to describe it.
I think so.
So I think we've described the mechanism of the allocation list and the allocation order. Again, the list is the list of players. The order is the order of teams. That's a good sort of memory device. No, not mnemonic device.
Mnemonic device.
Device. I can never say that word correctly.
It's because there's a P in there.
The bigger question is, which I think is always the more interesting question with MLS convoluted, easy for me to say, rules and regulations, is why? Why is there an allocation list? Why don't they just sort of let it be that if a player's going to come to Major League Soccer and a club wants him, just kind of let them pair off naturally. Let nature take its course. Why have this weird list and order?
I mean, I think with notable exceptions, any of those questions can be answered when it comes to Major League Soccer with the word parity. And it's about keeping the league as fair as they can, as equal as they can. So yes, there are going to be those instances where Clint Dempsey wants to come, we're going to make that happen. But overall, I think you're going to have, if say Fabian Johnson is moving to the United States to play in Major League Soccer, he's going to want to play in a larger market, in a big market, in a quote unquote attractive city. And so I think if you're not putting things in place to make sure that everybody has a shot at getting these very talented players, you're going to end up with 4 or 5 teams always getting those names.
But he's not though, right? Fabian Johnson will probably, if he comes to the United States, he'll probably end up playing for a team in a major media market.
But again, in order to do that, that team will have to pay. They'll have to pay a lot of money to get that player. The team who gets that money can then use it however they want.
So you're forcing the major media market teams to give something up to get up the allocation.
Yeah, and
the thing that worries me is that you make it harder then for Fabian Johnson to enter the league because you're putting maybe not a gigantic obstacle, but you're putting one more obstacle between Fabian Johnson and Major League Soccer.
That's true. Yeah. And I think then...
And it's an obstacle he can't control. He's got to go and let those two teams trade it out between themselves. He can't even get involved.
I mean, that's what happened to Jermaine Jones. I mean, I think he would argue that there was some tomfoolery in there as well, but when he came back...
No, wasn't he excluded from the allocation
because he was a special U.S. player.
He was a special Clint Dempsey type player of a certain quality.
That's your answer, is that then there are going to be those instances where, okay, this is too convoluted, you're being a stick in the mud, you're not letting this happen, we're going to open it up and we're going to classify him as, the German-American who's never played here before law, that now you can have control, and then they're going to change it a little bit if they need to.
It's almost an insult if you're on the allocation list. Because it means you're not quite special. Like Leo Messi would not be on the allocation list.
LA Galaxy are there right now, and I think they're pretty happy to be there.
They're there. No, I mean on the list of
the
players. Because it's like saying you're not special enough to be excluded from these rules. Like Leo Messi's not on there. You know what I'm saying?
I think if you think about it from the thing we're about to talk about with discovery rights, I think that's part of it too. So you don't have a team saying, "Oh, we discovered Leo Messi, so we get first right to him." To have them in the allocation order or allocation list.
Oh, it separates them out from the discovery right. Okay.
Yes, so then you don't have one team holding onto the rights for a player.
All right, Mr. Rockwell, you said it. You said discovery rights.
Yeah.
What are discovery rights? What happens there?
Okay. As far as I understand it, because it's another one where it takes a minute to get your head around it, it is essentially every team in Major League Soccer has, I think, 7 spots is what your research determined, right? You have seven players that you can have on your discovery list, and that can be anyone in the world as long as you put them on your discovery list first.
But what's the point of your discovery list? What does it even do?
It essentially allows you to have like the first rights to the player, and you have to have it to sign.
Enter Major League Soccer.
And you have to have it to sign anybody. So even if they weren't on your discovery list when you started negotiating with them, you better put them on there real fast because you have to have their rights. Because somebody else could say, "Oh no, while Atlanta are negotiating with the next exciting young Paraguayan teenager," Minnesota could say, "Oh no, we had him on our list first," and then you have to pay Minnesota, I believe, $50,000 to get the discovery rights.
So it's
to that
another mechanism that's been set up. So again, my question is, why have this?
And again, parity. I think it's because if
Is
you
it
really
just
have
so teams can keep extorting $50,000 each time?
No, I think that's the cynical way, which is apparently where my brain goes immediately. No, but I think the reality is if you're a team who is really focused on scouting, if you have sent people around the world to go to lesser-known leagues in lesser-known cities and lesser-known areas to find these talents, and then that player scores 5 goals in a game and it makes YouTube, and then a team who's just sitting at home is like, "Oh yeah, we'll put him on our list. He seems good. He's an 18-year-old teenager." Like, I think it rewards the people who are doing that research, going out there and finding those players, at least theoretically.
Okay, I think that makes sense.
I'm assuming that's where it comes from, is that if you've found these players, if you've identified that talent, you deserve to keep them and not have them go to another team because that team said, "No, we want him and we'll pay him a little bit more."
Okay, all right, that's fair enough. So discovery rights
and I think that's a big part of it, is that if you found that 19-year-old Argentinian player, there's other clubs out there who can say, "Oh, we'll pay him double what they're offering," and then he might say, "All right, well, yeah, I'll go to them instead." Discovery rights means, well, then that other team has to sell the rights first, and they're probably not going to want to do that.
But that doesn't work in Major League Soccer, right? Because he's getting paid the same whatever because he's coming through Major League Soccer, where your wage is your wage.
Well, no, but that team, I mean, it's how it comes into your salary cap, right? So Minnesota could say, I don't know why I keep going to Minnesota. Minnesota could say, we'll pay him $200,000, and Columbus could say, we'll pay him $300,000.
I guess. Yeah. It seems like a collective decision with the league and the club, but yes, I guess you're right. The different teams will be willing to go different ways with their salary budget.
Yeah.
Okay. Also worth noting, discovery rights and special discovery player, no necessary relationship, but they've got the same word discovery in it.
I think so.
I would propose to Major League Soccer a slight terminology overhaul.
I think that's a good
idea. To make things a lot more self-evident so they make more sense.
Yep.
And just to sort of eliminate all the repetition of words in different mechanisms.
I agree, but then I also get annoyed when they tell me the specific ways that I have to refer to a team. So I'm not sure I would actually enjoy that when I really think about it.
I think I said LA Galaxy, not the LA Galaxy today.
Are we going to be okay?
At least I didn't say Los Angeles.
SWAT team kicking down the door?
I didn't say Los Angeles Gal or something like that. That would be the
LA
ultimate.
Galaxies?
Yeah.
Yeah. The LAFC Galaxies?
Ready for another one?
Sure.
Okay, so Gary Thorne wants to know about Yamil Asad.
Gary, that oh boy was not to you. It was just to, I know what's coming.
So, okay, here's what's happened with Yamil Asad. He is a Vélez Sarsfield player in Argentina, right? Last year, Atlanta loaned Yamil Asad from Vélez Sarsfield, 2017. Then he went back. This year, DC United are loaning Yamil Asad from the team that owns him, Vélez Sarsfield. So why, asks Gary, does DC United owe Atlanta $500,000 in various allocation monies?
Okay. And to explain this, I'm going to go from the beginning here and try to do it succinctly. But essentially, my assumption is going to be Atlanta, when they first identified Yamil Asad, they had to do the discovery rights claim. They put him on their list. They got him as a player on loan. When he goes back to Vélez Sarsfield, he is no longer playing for, I always want to call them Vélez Skarsgård. That would not be the thing. He is no longer playing for Atlanta, but because he played for them, they now own his rights. And it is effectively...
His MLS rights.
His MLS
not his
rights.
international
rights.
Yeah.
True. They have his MLS rights, which means that then if he comes back to the league, they have his rights, so whomever wants to sign him or negotiate with him has to first get approval from Atlanta.
That's it. So I think of it as once you walk into any MLS team, you have to first walk through the MLS door to get in the MLS building, right? And once you're in the MLS building, it's already predetermined that in MLS, Yamil Asad was an Atlanta player, right? So once he comes back, even if he wants to go to DC, he still gets rerouted through Atlanta, and then DC have to trade with Atlanta to get his rights, even though he's actually owned by Velas Sarsfield.
Because
very complicated, but it kind of makes sense when you think of it that way.
That's the thing. Again,
single entity. It makes sense when you think of it as MLS is single entity, and the teams are departments within Major League Soccer.
And that is why Daryl said at the very beginning, single entity is like the most important aspect of this, because for so many people, if they're just getting into Major League Soccer, if they've maybe only followed NFL teams or NBA teams or just teams in the Premier League or whatever, this idea of like, well, he's done playing there, so he's no longer there. They don't employ him anymore. Manchester United aren't sending him a check. That doesn't relate. Once you played for a team in MLS, unless you are a specific caliber of player, they hold on to those MLS rights until you come back. And then if you do, they can either keep you or they can negotiate with somebody else to give up those rights.
All right, you ready for the next thing?
Sure.
Okay. William Hagens wants to know, so we're getting away from rules and regs here to more general MLS questions that kind of, it wasn't quite what we asked before, but they were really good questions, so we kept them in. William Hagens wants to know, what triggers video assistant review in Major League Soccer, better known as VAR?
Yeah. Since I went long on that last one, I'm going to try to channel Howard Webb, who goes very specific when it comes to this. Goals, penalties, straight red cards, and cases of mistaken identity.
So there's sort of the four, I read the same article, I believe, 4 high-leverage situations. So anytime there's one of those 4 things that Taylor just mentioned, again, goals.
Match-changing decisions.
Goals, penalty kicks, straight red cards, very specifically not yellow cards, and mistaken identity. There is a check in the sort of up in the VAR booth. A check meaning they rewatch it, essentially. If they see something, then they tell. If they see something, they say something. They tell the referee, "Hey, we got a problem here." That's when you see him put his finger to his ear.
Yes.
So that's it. It's pretty straightforward. And as I understand it, those VAR rules, isn't that the same as the FIFA rules?
I assume so. I think the wrinkle there is that like you do have like goals is a big term because that could mean like, was there a foul in the box? Did somebody's jersey get pulled, as we saw in the FA Cup yesterday? Was he offside? Was he not offside? Like, so those can all factor into it. So that one is maybe the one that's a little bit more broad and causes problems. But yes, I think overall they're the same.
Okay. We answered that?
We did.
That was efficient.
We did. I think so.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
All right.
All right, Daryl. Then Trevor Crowell would like to know, what's the difference between DC United's relationship with the Richmond Kickers and New York Red Bull's relationship with New York Red Bull 2?
So this is about Major League Soccer relationships with USL teams. And essentially there are 2 different types, right? And that's what Trevor's laid out here. DC United's relationship with the Richmond Kickers is they're 2 completely separate teams. They're not related, except for an affiliate agreement that they have, which means that DC United sends around, I want to say 4 or 5 players on loan from DC United to Richmond Kickers during the season.
Right.
And that's sort of the extent of their agreement, right? That's it. We'll loan you 5 players. You know, you get some free players. Good luck to you. I'm not a huge fan of it just because I don't think it serves the USL team as well. That's maybe a separate conversation.
Sure.
With New York Red Bulls and New York Red Bulls 2, I mean, they have the same ownership group. Those 2 teams are very closely related. You can send players pretty regularly.
It's essentially a farm team.
Yes, you can send players pretty regularly back and forth. If you say farm team, the USL Communications Department might come after you, but you're not wrong.
Yeah.
Right? You're not wrong. So guys like Derek Etienne Jr., Tyler Adams, all spent time with New York Red Bulls too. You can move through different little mechanisms. It's not quite as fluid as just you can move up and down. You have to sort of sign a short-term contract with MLS if you're one of the USL players, and you have to sort of reveal what your salary is so that you don't break the salary budget. But there's a lot more fluidity between the 2. So you can use your New York Red Bulls 2 team as a proving ground for your young players and then eventually promote them to New York Red Bulls. It's supposed to go Development Academy, USL team, MLS team.
Yep.
You've got that straight sort of throughway.
Is that allowed? Is USL okay with that?
Yes.
I'm basically trying to not go on a rant is basically what's happening here. So, okay.
You're doing fine.
Good. All right. Well, then let's go to another question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Phil Grooms asks, Phil Grooms of the USL Eastern Conference Confidential podcast, I believe. When Enzo Martinez of Charlotte Independence signed with the Colorado Rapids, how come Charlotte Independence got nothing?
Is there a chance that Phil knows this and he's just testing us?
I don't know.
Okay.
It could be that.
Okay.
It could be that.
First of all, do we know that Enzo Martinez or that Charlotte didn't get anything for him?
We don't. So I did the research. including putting some emails out to Charlotte Independents to ask, can you explain the mechanism of this transfer, this trade? Like, what did you get, if anything? How did it work?
And they answered right away and said, yes, we're going to fundamentally explain the way that transfers work.
In fact, I was going to say they haven't replied. They have replied.
I was sarcastically joking.
Okay, so the reply I got is, per club policy, transaction terms are not disclosed.
There you go. And I think that...
I just noticed that email on my phone.
But I think that kind of answers the question, which is that they didn't report it, but I think there was something. There was some sort of transfer of something to make that move possible, because a lot of times with USL... I shouldn't say a lot of times, but from our experience, USL clubs have a lot of players on season-long contracts, and that's it. Then they occasionally have some on multi-year contracts. Enzo Martinez, as far as we understand, was on a multi-year contract.
Even if he wasn't, he was definitely signed for 2018, because I found a release from December 2017 saying Charlotte Independents has re-signed this list of players. There's like 3 or 4 of their better players, including Enzo Martinez. He had a 2018 contract with Charlotte Independents. That should mean that an MLS team can't also have a contract with him at the same time.
I mean, it
without
does.
somehow making that trade or transfer happen.
And so what I could see is there was a clause in the contract that Enzo Martinez's representatives put in that said if a Major League Soccer club comes calling, you have to release him from his contract.
That would be smart. He's got a good agent if he did.
There may have just been a willingness on Charlotte's part to say, sure, we'll let you out so you can pursue your dreams.
That's also true.
That's not how businesses work. So I think in the end of the day, there was probably a minor fee that was paid to allow that transaction to occur.
But the interesting thing is then, I don't disagree, but like with the single entity structure of Major League Soccer, does the fee come from the Colorado Rapids sort of owner-investor? Does the fee come from Major League Soccer head office funds? Is it then a fee that is spread out on Colorado Rapids' salary budget for 2018? Or will it show up when they reveal their... Oh, they don't really reveal all their salary information, do they?
No,
they
they'll just reveal what he's being paid. Yeah.
Actually, no, they won't reveal it. Major League Soccer Players Union.
That's what I mean.
Will reveal it.
But I mean, it's no different than like a normal transfer then, right? It's just his salary plus whatever they paid will be folded into that lump sum.
I guess, and we just can't guess what it is. Like, normally in other countries it would be sort of reported more or speculated in the newspaper, or someone somewhere would get some news and we'd find out about it, right?
I suppose so. It makes that whole guaranteed compensation part of the salary slightly confusing, because it doesn't mean that he is guaranteed to get that compensation. It just means that's what they're guaranteed to pay. I would guess that that actually is for him, because it's the Players Union releasing that stuff. There you go. All right.
So we don't know if Charlotte Independents got anything. We're thinking maybe they did, but we can't guess at how much.
It's also worth noting, though, that like that's not that uncommon. That really clubs don't want to release the amount that they've paid, and that extends globally. That a lot of times the transfer fee that you see is what maybe an agent has leaked or somebody has leaked. It doesn't necessarily mean that is the official fee, unless you can get your hands on the actual contract to see the stipulations.
The reason I find this a little frustrating is that I see the evolution of American soccer needs to be that USL can sort of... Players can excel in USL, as Enzo Martinez did for Charlotte Independents, and move on up to the first division, to Division 1, to Major League Soccer, and then Charlotte Independents get some money for that they can use to sort of reinvest in the next season. And I think that would be a great way of establishing sort of a pipeline, right? Yeah. But we don't see enough evidence of it, either because fees aren't reported or just because my feeling is that it just doesn't happen enough, that players move from Division 2 or 3 up to Division 1.
But aren't you saying that based mostly on speculation? Like, you think that that's what happens? But I guess what I'm saying
in other countries that is what happens a lot, and lower division teams make a lot of their income from selling players on. It doesn't happen as much in Major League Soccer, right? There's not as many players assigned from USL and NASL teams
I guess not.
Up to Major League Soccer teams.
It might have to do with, again, discovery rights and homegrown player rules and everything
all the various mechanisms.
But again, I would point out, though, that there's a decent chance that maybe Charlotte just don't want people to know how much money they have. They don't want to know how much they got for them, because also they don't want to give other teams like a level for like, okay, Enzo Martinez, I would say, this is me talking, was their best player, and say, oh, they gave them $50,000 for him. Well, their second best player, we're going to give $30,000 for. I'm just saying, like, you don't want to give other teams.
But
I
do, because I would like to have like market values established in Division 2, so that then an economy can flourish.
Yeah, that's you not being an owner. Is the difference there? Right, but that's you being the fan who wants transparency versus the owner who does not.
Each owner protecting their own interests, which I agree they are by doing that. They're sort of not allowing an economy to flourish at Division 2 level, which would benefit all of American soccer.
Fair?
Sure. Yeah.
So you want to get rid of capitalism? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, I want more capitalism. I want more capitalism in American soccer.
All right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So you're just calling for decency.
Just capitalism. Okay, so the other element of this
You
is...
are Will from the newsroom, is what I'm getting.
The other element of this is that Charlotte Independence are the USL affiliate of the Colorado Rapids. And to go back to Trevor Crowell's question, that has no bearing on the transfer.
That is interesting.
Because the player was never loaned from the Rapids to Charlotte to begin with, right? That only works in one direction. There's no sort of official relationship of players going the other way.
I'm not sure I knew that.
Yeah, I
just
told you.
I know. Well, no, but to go to like the player we always talk about was Hugh Roberts.
Yeah.
When he left Richmond, he said like he was looking for MLS opportunities, and that's why we were both sort of like, oh, Bethlehem makes sense because they have that relationship. But really, it's no different than it is with Richmond Kickers. It's just a different team.
No, that's different because Bethlehem is owned by Philadelphia Union.
Oh, okay, cool.
It's a very different relationship. Yes, cool. Charlotte Independence are not owned by the Colorado Rapids. They just have that DC United Richmond Kickers affiliate deal.
There it is. All right, now I feel better. Now it makes sense.
Final question. You ready for this one?
Yep.
Lucas Muller wants to know, why is the website basically Major League Soccer.com? Because it's MLSsoccer.com. It's like ATM machine, like an unnecessary repetition of the word. Why is that, Taylor?
I haven't spoken to the webmasters of MLSsoccer.com. My assumption is that basically when they went to register the domain, MLS.com was already taken.
Yep.
I think it was like a realty group, or it might still be a realty group.
I just pulled it up for our research before. It's multiple listings site. So it is like all the real estate listings in one place, I think, is their sales pitch. So the thing is, this existed before they named the league.
Yep.
That's why it was it MLSsoccer.net back in the day or something like that?
Be.
So they've never been able to get MLS. They don't. Sometimes MLS, if you just Google MLS, the multiple listing site thing comes up.
Oh,
first.
Do you want to know how I know that for sure? Is because when I was looking for like a glossary and definitions today to help me with some of the answers to this, I was like, that doesn't apply at all. What do you? Oh, you're the MLS. You're the other site. Got it. I
can only think that when MLS was founded in 1996, the web was not as big, right? And a lot of people were not as web savvy, and no one really saw it being as important. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So probably I don't even know when Google launched, but I don't think anyone Googled MLS to see what else was out there.
Yeah. I mean, it probably just wasn't the priority. And so then why would you make it like MLS Soccer, Major League Soccer.com?
But why wouldn't you make it Major League Soccer.com? Because that would be available, right?
Because it's long. You just want to have it as short as possible.
Is that what you think?
I think so.
That makes sense. But
you wouldn't have like MLSoccer.com.
But you... yeah, that makes sense. So I kind of thought it was because they wanted the word soccer and they wanted the phrase MLS in the URL.
I think things can be two things.
Covered for both things as well.
Yeah.
So that's our best guess, Lucas. We don't really know why it isn't just MajorLeagueSoccer.com. Do you know what happens if you go to MajorLeagueSoccer.com?
What?
You get auto-redirected, 301 redirect to MLSsoccer.com. So they've got it. They've got the URL. They like the MLSsoccer.com.
And they could change it now that you can do whatever you want to like MLS.MLS, I'm assuming.
Yes,
but then
soccer.MLS.
Yeah, but then you'd have to confuse people with a whole new website.
I'm a big proponent of not complaining about URLs because once you know it, right?
Honestly, it never even occurred to me.
Really?
No, I just always write, like I get MLSS and then it sends me to MLS Soccer. MLS sends me to the MLS Reddit page. It's one or the other.
Do you think MLS will ever get big enough that they can make a big offer to MLS.com and say, hey, we want this domain? Or is real estate always going to be more valuable than soccer in the United States? The answer is yes.
Probably, but also I just think that it doesn't really matter how much money you have. If somebody's sitting on that that website, they can ask for so much money that no, I don't think so.
Yeah, it'd be more like you could have Leo Messi come and play in your league, or you can get that URL. You might as well spend the money on Messi.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
Do you feel like we've answered everything?
I think so. Yeah. I hope so. We'll find out when we get angry tweets or happy tweets.
Have you got that headache you were talking about?
No, it's disappeared. It's gone away a little bit.
I still feel like we've talked about a lot of very complicated things in the last hour.
I think I said this off air. I compare it to when you've studied a lot for a test and then you're reviewing with like another person who's also studied, and you can sort of almost have a conversation because you know the terminology so well that you like go super deep into this one concept, and the people on the outside who haven't studied are like, oh God, I'm going to fail this test. So that's kind of where I feel is like, I think we've done it, and I think we've gone deep enough on this stuff, but I'm sure there's other things that we've just barely scratched the surface.
Well, let's say this then. If there's anything that we didn't address that you would like to know about Major League Soccer, we'll maybe try and answer it in the very near future. Do it as a listener question, and we'll do a follow-up. Go to TotalSoccerShow.com/questions. We will we will answer any future MLS explainers that need doing.
That sounds good to me.
Good?
I was going to say email Daryl at Total Soccer Show, but yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Then we should probably get to, since we've only been talking for an hour and 13 minutes, we should get to the Scouting Network for today.
All right. Where do you want to start?
At the top with... I was sarcastic.
I meant which side of the page?
And it shot me in the foot. Bill Park and Garen Green. I didn't realize how many reports there were. Usually it's obvious which one is the second part. Bill Park and Garen Green both scouting Chris Durkin, 18-year-old American midfielder for DC United.
So you know it's big news if we got 2 reports.
We do.
Yeah.
If the rumors are true, Portuguese side Benfica are close to finalizing a summer move for Chris Durkin. Matt Doyle of MLSsoccer.com has suggested that Durkin would play with Benfica B, potentially replacing Keaton Parks if he moves to the senior team.
Ooh, that'd be a good reason to watch both Benfica teams.
Yep. Doyle seems to be a fan, or at least okay with the move, arguing, quote, it would make sense from Durkin's perspective. He'd get an immediate run with Benfica B, which is one of the greatest development engines in the world, end quote. So he could get some minutes with DC until July and then move to Portugal.
So if you combined Bill and Garen's reports into sort of one super report here on Chris Durkin.
Yes.
All right. I think I've stated this before. I'll state it again. I would prefer to see Chris Durkin in Major League Soccer for at least a year before he moves on.
Okay.
Let him play Division 1 in the United States, then move on to Europe.
I mean, 4 months, a year. What's the
4
difference?
months, okay. All right. Ted Tracy is scouting Rubio Rubin, a gentleman who did go overseas. The 21-year-old American forward now with Club Tijuana in Liga MX. Ted says Rubio made his first start for Los Cholos and played all 90 against top-of-the-table Club America. Cholos have been the best defensive team during the close era, kept the match 0-0 in the Azteca with only 21% of possession. Rubin played left wing and was involved in 2 of their best chances toward the end of the game, making a great left-footed cross to the back post for a header and then attempting a left-footed volley on the ensuing corner kick that went well wide of the goal. So is this a success or not?
I mean, you kept him scoreless. I'd say it's a success. Why
But he's
not?
a striker.
Yeah, you know, he's doing his job. Hey, Samuel Eto'o was a striker. Sometimes you got to drop back and play some defense. Jeff and Sam Huffman scouting Mukwele Akele, the 21-year-old American attacker for Villarreal C. We love Mukwele Akele, even if we haven't seen him in many years. After an uneventful 21-minute appearance last week in Villarreal C's 2-0 loss to Levante B, in which Shaq Moore played the full 90 for Levante B.
Did they go up against each other? Because Mukwele Akele is, I think, sometimes a left winger and Shaq Moore is a right back.
They definitely did, and it sounds like Shaq Moore got the better of that one. Mukwele finally broke through in a 3-2 win on Saturday against Torre Levante. He used his fancy footwork, a roulette.
That's a 360 spin for those...
You did one of those this past week, and I was
did.
impressed.
Do you know what I did? I did one, and then Pav tackled me and did one.
Oh, that's
in the
embarrassing.
other direction.
All right, I take away the credit I gave
He
you.
also scored the winner with a Rabona. We should stop inviting him to practice.
That's probably fair. He did do that, didn't he? Anyway, so he did a roulette to assist on the opening goal. He scored the game's second goal and then earned and scored on a penalty for the game winner. Well done, Mukwele.
Mukwele Akele doing things. About time.
Yep.
Andy Holland is scouting Julian Green, the 22-year-old American forward. He's on loan at Greuther Fürth from VfB Stuttgart. Andy says Julian Green picked up his first assist of the season on Greuther Fürth's opener in a 2-1 win over Eintracht Braunschweig. He has now started 15 games for the Bundesliga 2 side and has as many assists, 2, as goals this season. That's probably not quite the level of productivity that fans were expecting.
Probably not. Daniel Jones scouting Cody Cropper, 25-year-old American goalkeeper for the New England Revolution. I like that Daniel has stuck with Cody Cropper. As I recall, he didn't necessarily want a goalkeeper when we assigned him one, but he has stuck through.
I don't think he wanted a Major League Soccer player. Well, Cody Cropper became a Major League Soccer player.
He did.
Yeah.
That tends to happen. Cropper was largely responsible for the Revolutions defeating the Houston Dynamo and winning the preseason mobile
Did you call
mini.
them the Revolutions?
The Revs.
the New England Revolutions.
Yeah, that's what they are. Yeah. The Revs, Revolutions. Why not? You can't pluralize one and not the other. You can. Defeating the Houston Dynamo and winning the preseason mobile mini Sun Cup. Cropper fouled.
The big one.
Cropper fouled Albert Ellis in the box to allow Houston to equalize 1-1, but he made 2 stellar saves late in the game to make sure the game went to penalties. He then came up big, making a save that allowed New England to prevail.
Zach Lippert is scouting Alejandro Guido, the 23-year-old American midfielder for Club Tijuana. Zach Lippert says that Ali, as he calls him, has found minutes hard to come by in the last few games for Los Cholos. When he has got minutes, he struggled to make the most of them. He was unable to find the back of the net in their Champions League match after coming off the bench in the last half hour, and CD Montague were able to get back in the game and tie it in the dying minutes.
Jonathan Failer scouting Tommy Redding, 21-year-old American center back for the New York Red Bulls. I'm sorry you're not reading this one because I feel like you would have committed the Daryl mistake. Tommy is getting ready for his first season with the Red Bulls, and there is hope that he will challenge former Orlando teammate Aurelian Collin for minutes. Anything to say, Daryl?
Or partner him.
Yeah, could be. Anything else to say about Tommy Redding?
I'd say that I'm high on Redding entering the season, naming him as the comeback player of the year.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Daryl from the Total Soccer Show is high on Redding entering the season, naming him as the comeback player of the year.
There we go. Jared Morgenstern is scouting Alphonso Davies, a 17-year-old Canadian attacker for the Vancouver Whitecaps. Jared says Davies ended his preseason on a high note, scoring in the 51st minute of a 2-1 win over the LA Galaxy with a nicely taken shot to the top of the corner. Whether or not his preseason performances will factor into his starting time in the regular season remains to be seen, but Jared predicts that Fonzie will get a combined 10 goals and assists and will then get a move to Europe at the end of the season after his 18th birthday.
All right, that's a very specific prediction. I'm down. Trent Brockel scouting Timothy Tillman, the 19-year-old German-American midfielder/attacker for Bayern Munich 2. After a long winter break, Timmy finally returned to the field. He subbed on the 66th minute with Bayern Munich 2, already 2-0 up on VfB Eichstätt. He had an uneventful showing, seeing out the victory. He could still be called up by Tab Ramos for the March U20 camp, but a one-time switch would be necessary for him to play.
Dylan Veach is scouting Kai Havertz, the 18-year-old German midfielder for Bayer Leverkusen. Dylan says that Kai Havertz played the full match in Bayer's 2-0 loss to Schalke, started in his preferred position, but he performed a more defensive role after his team were reduced to 10 men in the 40th minute. While Kai was one of the better performers on the day for Bayer, the entire team didn't play very well, which is pretty disappointing given the significance of the game.
And basically, it put Schalke ahead in the Champions League standings.
All right.
Shreyas Romani scouting Dan Axel Zagadou, the 18-year-old French defender for Borussia Dortmund.
You missed out. Very tall.
Also that. The very tall Zagadou, who is now Dortmund's fourth-choice centre-back after the winter sales of Mark Bartra and Neven Subotic, has been either left off the matchday squad or an unused substitute in each of Dortmund's matches since the winter break ended. In even more depressing news, he was one of the Dortmund players, along with Alexander Isak and Mishi Batshuayi, who was the target of racial abuse from the Atalanta supporters last week.
I heard about that. Kevin Downs
UEFA is investigating.
Good. Kevin Downs is scouting Trevor Zwitsloot, the 18-year-old Dutch-American midfielder for Werder Bremen. If you haven't heard that name before, Trevor Zwitsloot. Trevor returned from injury to see action in Bremen U19's 2-2 draw with Wolfsburg, which is notable given that he's been out since early November. He came on at half-time, then started the team's next game against RB Leipzig.
Borg Radu scouting Enes Unal, the 20-year-old Turkish striker for Villarreal. Enes started in Villarreal's 1-0 win over Getafe in La Liga. He got to work quickly, scoring with a sliding finish from a far post run after slipping between two defenders.
Ooh, that's a good description.
That'll work. Yeah, well done, Borg. Enes and his fellow strike partner didn't see much more action after that, as Villarreal were overrun in midfield. Villarreal were lucky to come away with 3 points, as the keeper had to save 2 penalties to keep it at 1-0.
Taylor Mukaria is scouting Ademola Lookman, the 20-year-old English forward who's on loan at RB Leipzig from Everton. Lookman is the guy that was like, no, I'm going to Germany. I've heard that's where the action is at. Don't send me to the Championship.
It's an exact quote, by the way.
It's not far off. I'm not going to Derby County. Ademola Lookman got another start for RB Leipzig over the weekend and contributed to the opening goal by making a lung-busting run into the box before putting his shot off the post where his teammate finished the job. Leipzig lost, but it seems like more starts are in his future.
Robert Newman scouting Mason Mount, the 19-year-old English midfielder on loan at Vitesse from Chelsea. Mount played the full 90 for Vitesse in their 2-2 draw with VVV Venlo over the weekend. VVV Venlo. He proved the hero, scoring his 7th goal of the season on a free kick 3 minutes into the second half to level the score. Despite only being on loan for the season, Mount appears to be settling into the first 11 at Vitesse and establishing himself in the Eredivisie.
Manny Alcantara is scouting Junior Firpo, the 21-year-old Dominican left-back at Real Betis. So Manny specifically asked to scout Junior Firpo because he's a Dominican player in La Liga. Manny says Junior Firpo played his 3rd straight full match for Real Betis since being promoted from the reserve team earlier this month. This time he was heavily involved in the attack as a surging Real Betis earned a 2-0 victory over Levante.
There we are. Many scouting reports, all of them great. Thank you to everyone who sent those in. again.
Oh, yeah. Thank you to everybody. If you have signed up for the Scouting Network recently, again, if you're waiting for your player, send me an email, jump the queue, Daryl@TotalSoccerShow.com. I'll make sure to get you your player. I'll be doing some scouting assignments over the weekend. That's my plan for the weekend, among other things.
And Daryl clarifies that because this is going to be our final show for the week. We've done lots of content. I think we've done enough shows for enough content for 6 shows this week.
Oh, no, I was coming in tomorrow to do a whole Arsene Wenger special.
Okay. I think some will want to hear that, but most will not. I do, before we close, want to go on a slight rant.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Feel free to chime in.
Okay.
I just want to say we've had a lot of people send tweets, send emails, kind of freaked out about the status of the 2026 World Cup bid.
Oh, yes.
And I guess there was a report that maybe people were support was waning, that maybe it was going to be Morocco and not the United States. People have asked us what we think. My opinion, not well-researched, not talking to anybody, is that, number one, if you read that full article where that story first appeared,
it unravels, right? It unravels towards the end.
Somewhat. Yeah, it's basically they're citing a source who says that these 4 different federations, confederacies, are going to support Morocco or a North African bid, but then there's another source who says no, the United States has it locked up, they've got plenty of support. So there is a little bit of headline grabbing attention, but I would also say that if it comes down to it and the United States doesn't get it, I know it's easy to spin it as modern politics prevailing or the status of the United States, but you look at the country that is about to host the World Cup and the country that is going to host it in 2022. I don't think FIFA cares about that stuff. I think FIFA, at the end of the day, cares about where they're going to make the most money. And I think or how are their members going to make the most money, legally or not. And I think that if the United States doesn't get it, I do think that that's a bigger part of it. I mean, when it comes down to it, maybe this is just because I rewatched that John Oliver thing about FIFA, and that factors into my feelings right now. I just think that the United States is still in fine position. I don't think it's slowly slipping away or anything like that.
Here's a good way to put it. The United States and Mexico and Canada, are the bid for 2026 is in the exact same situation as it was before that article came out, as it is after the article came out. All that's happened is someone decided to publish that story with no direct sort of evidence that any voting has actually changed.
No, and it may have.
Just a clickable headline.
That's the thing, is that United States still on track, or USA, Mexico, Canada joint bid, still on track to win the World Cup.
And there's still a threat from the Moroccan bid, because there always is when there's another bid out there. Nothing has really changed.
No, but my point is that this joint bid on track to win isn't a fun headline compared to, or it's not going to get as many clicks as that bid is in doubt. That's going to sell it, and people are going to click on that because there's already fear that might happen. U.S. soccer fans are already so upset with the state of American soccer that that would be the blow that would get people to click on it, and it would get a lot of attention as a result.
And as a result, we're going to headline this show. Our title's going to be The Shocking Rule Changes in Major League Soccer That Will Change the Way You Think About the World.
Exactly.
10 rules that will rock the world of American soccer.
Yes.
It won't be.
No, it will not. But so if you are freaking out about that, I would say I don't think you need to be, but I also think you don't need to be because there is literally nothing you can do about it. And that's really the truth. Is that's something I try to remind myself of when there are situations that freak me out or make me feel scared. Is that I might not love the situation as it presently exists, but I can't go out there and change anything. So just sitting at home and worrying about whether or not it's going to change things, whether or not the United States is going to get the World Cup, all it does is make me worry about stuff. And then I don't do other things that make me happier. So that's what I'd rather do.
What if Sunil Gulati could appoint you as a special why the World Cup should be in the US ambassador, and he sends you on a world tour and you meet with all the federation heads and sort of lay out why it should come to the United States?
I know how rambly I can be.
Show them a picture
I'm not sure
of me.
That's great.
Show them a picture of me and say, make this man happy.
Do you think Always Sunny, Parks and Rec, and The Office references would carry over to every single culture around the world? Because if so, I could do it.
There'd be at least one Federation head who was a huge Parks and Rec fan.
I hope so.
Yeah?
I hope so. Heidi Klum, wasn't she the head of her? No, she was just a representative of her country. So her. Yeah, she'd work. Okay, cool.
All right, Taylor Rockwell, I think we're about done here
on that
tonight.
note.
Yeah, on that note. So I think you mentioned this earlier, but we are not going to put out a Friday show.
I did.
Not least because it's late Thursday night as this show is being recorded. So this is basically the Thursday/Friday show.
Because it could be 2 shows. It's that long.
And it's almost as long as an actual soccer match, right? We're nearly at 90 minutes here.
Yep.
So we're going to give everybody time to digest all the MLS content we've put out this week. We will be back on Sunday with our weekend review where we cover the Premier League action. We actually probably will talk some Arsene Wenger unfortunately, as well as the MLS action. We're going to fold MLS into our thumbs up, thumbs down review, right? It's going to be part of the roundup of all the action we saw this weekend, as well as US Women's National Team, who are playing Germany right now, I want to say, in the She Believes Cup. We'll get a look at that, and that will be folded in too. So lots to talk about this Sunday. Until then, Taylor Rockwell, you over there, thank you for taking the time to talk to me about all the rules and regs today.
Right back at you, buddy.
Listeners, thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again on Sunday.